Us about this doctrine of divine simplicity and how someone might apply it to this type of problem in theology.
Well, briefly stated, the doctrine of divine simplicity states that God is not composite in any of the ways that finite beings are composite. He has no mode of composition that would imply finitude or limitation on his part or the need of a cause. So that means that he's obviously not physically composite. He's not composed of a body that can be broken up. But in its more radical statements, which I think are its more honest statements, ultimately it means that there is not in God a distinction between essence and existence, or subject and accident, or, like Thomas Aquinas says, nature and supposit. Basically, the idea is that God is this pure, undifferentiated actuality. He is not an instance of something. He is simply pure being, pure, undifferentiated actuality. And only thus can he be the cause and the ultimate source of everything that is composite. And so everything, therefore, that requires a cause, requires something to explain the unity of its constituent parts. Well, it's true that the doctrine of divine simplicity was more or less taken for granted by all the participants in the early Trinitarian debates. You really find this doctrine in all kinds of different world religions, but it was very prominent, especially in the Greek philosophical notion of God, and especially the Platonic one. The problem with this is that even though the early Trinitarian theologians constantly made reference to the doctrine of divine simplicity to try to understand how there can be one God and so on, it's not obvious that they are not abusing the doctrine in their theologizing, right? So somebody can say, well, it's true, the hypostases are modes of subsistence, but however, this, we have to remember that God is absolutely simple, and so he's not composed by these modes. There's no composition. Well, at this point, it seems to me like people are just contradicting themselves. They either want the Trinitarian theology or they want divine simplicity, but you can't really have it both ways. They use, it seems to me, divine simplicity to ward off some of the undesirable consequences of their Trinitarian postulations. But it's not really principled, because if you're really committed to a doctrine of divine simplicity, you have to do away with all notion of differentiation within God whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like divine simplicity is a useful tool that they bring in when it's convenient, and then they put it away when it becomes inconvenient. So I'm not convinced at all that there is a case for divine simplicity in Scripture. And it seems to me that the use of the doctrine of divine simplicity in Trinitarian theorizing is either highly selective or else just makes things nearly impossible to understand. People in theology want to use the same words. For whatever reason, it's sort of looked down upon in theology to start using different words and to speak about things differently. But what happens is that you have the same word and it just becomes undefinable. And then there's a problem of, well, it depends on what you mean by divine simplicity. It depends on what you mean by hypostasis. It depends on what you mean by ousia. And then you just get these problems where, words become endlessly definable in 1,000 different ways because nobody wants to just use a different word.
Yeah, when somebody says this doctrine contradicts that doctrine, you can always just redefine one of the doctrines and get out of it.
Yeah, which is, these are just word games at that point. We're no longer talking about anything concrete. We're just, finding ways of saving our preferred modes of speaking, which I think is personally an empty project.